Why did everyone on the deck freeze the moment she stepped into the light? She felt it before she saw it, that quiet shift in air, the way conversations thinned into whispers, the way bodies turned not out of respect but calculation. Lieutenant Commander Nora Calloway didn't flinch. She felt this silence before, in briefing rooms, in forward operating bases, in smoke-choked alleyways where choices cut deeper than bullets. But here on the USS Bataan, the silence carried a different weight. It wasn't danger, it was doubt. She stepped further onto the flight deck, boots steady on metal still wet from the morning washdown. A faint mist of salt clung to her uniform. The ship cut through the Persian Gulf with a kind of quiet authority, engines vibrating through steel, wind pushing against her face like a reminder. You've survived worse water than this. She rested her gloved fingertips on the cold railing and watched the horizon, a hard, bright line where sky crushed sea. She didn't blink. She didn't need to. She'd stared down bigger storms. But the question lingered in the back of her mind like a whisper she refused to acknowledge. What exactly did they think she was here to prove? Behind her, Boots approached, heavy, confident, and carrying a tone she knew too well. First Lieutenant Marcus Hawley didn't speak immediately. He let the air do the talking for him, let the crowd gather, let the moment swell into something performative. "You don't belong here, sweetheart," he said loud enough for all the Marines staging gear nearby to hear. Sweetheart, the word hit the steel harder than his boots. She didn't turn, didn't grant him eye contact. Marines muttered, some smirking, some tightening their jaws. Hawley waited for a reaction, any reaction, flinch, anger, retreat. He needed it, needed something to prove whatever story he'd already written in his head. Instead, Nora inhaled slow, measured, steady. But Hawley wasn't finished. "Maybe try the Navy nurses," he added, stepping closer, tone dipped with something smug, something territorial. "This is infantry training, real operations, not PowerPoints." There it was, the line drawn, the theater opening. He reached out and shoved her shoulder, firm, calculated, just enough to send her stepping back toward the safety net lining the deck's edge. Gasps broke out. Marines leaned in, every face locked on her. Hawley wanted fear. He wanted to establish dominance before the day's joint fast-rope drill even began. He wanted to prove she didn't belong before she had a chance to show that she did. But what he got was something else entirely. Nora stopped herself with one hand on the rail. Her balance recovered so easily it almost made the moment awkward, as if she refused to play her role in his script. She finally looked at him, not with anger, not with defiance, just a calm that made Hawley's chest tighten because calm meant control, and control meant she wasn't afraid. Her left hand lifted slightly, not aggressive, just habitual, thumb brushing the small compass tattooed on her wrist. 8 points, clean lines, a quiet mark of something no one here fully understood. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter engine rumbled awake, sending vibrations through the deck. The wind shifted, blowing a strand of hair loose from her bun. Hawley's jaw flexed. He needed more, needed to make his point in a way she couldn't ignore. He stepped even closer. But before he could speak, a voice echoed from above. "Lieutenant Commander Calloway." Captain Torres leaned over the catwalk railing. "Stand by for final brief." Hawley stiffened, the moment fractured. Nora didn't respond to him, didn't dignify the insult. She simply stepped past him, effortless in a way that stung more than any comeback. But before she reached the ladder, Hawley muttered under his breath, "You won't make it through today, not the way we're running it." She paused mid-step, a small beat, a single breath. Then she said, quietly enough to force him to lean in, "You'd be surprised what starts in water." She climbed the ladder without looking back. Below deck, the ship buzzed with the organized chaos of pre-mission prep. Marines checked gear. Corpsmen loaded med kits. Pilots ran communications tests. But everywhere she walked, Nora felt eyes track her, curious, skeptical, waiting. Not hostile, not entirely, just measuring. She changed into her fast rope rig in silence, checked her harness, secured her gloves, adjusted her plate carrier until the weight settled comfortably across her chest. She'd worn this loadout in colder water, darker nights, and tighter spaces than any Marine here knew existed. Still, something inside her twisted, a small, quiet ache. Why was she here again? Not the assignment, she understood the assignment, evaluation, integration, professional oversight. But her, why she was here. She already knew the answer, she just hated remembering it. A child's face flickered in her thoughts, small, pale, wearing sun-faded sunglasses too big for her head. Brooke's daughter, the girl who asked if her father had been brave. Nora swallowed hard and forced the memory down. Not erased, never erased, just pushed back far enough that she could breathe. A hand appeared beside her. Ramirez, senior enlisted, calm eyes, reputation built in real places with real scars. "You ready for this, ma'am?" he asked softly. She nodded, always. He studied her for a second longer than regulation required. Not suspicion, not doubt. Recognition. "You've done this before," he said. "Once or twice." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Just watch your footing today. Swells are rougher than they look." She caught the subtext. "Be careful, something's off. Holly is pushing too hard." "Copy," she said. The Hello Crew chief signaled, "Time to load." The blades roared overhead, chopping salty wind across their faces as they ran toward the helicopter. Nora boarded last, sliding into her position near the door. Holly sat across from her, jaw locked, arms folded tight like he was preparing for a fight instead of a drill. She felt the tension radiating off him, insecurity disguised as confidence, frustration masquerading as authority. But beneath that, fear. Fear that she wasn't what he thought she was. Fear that she might be more. The Hello lifted, rising over the ship in a rush of wind and steel. The sea below churned, dark and endless. The Marines gripped their ropes, ready for insertion. Holly kept his eyes on her. Nora didn't break the stare. The crew chief raised a hand, 30 seconds. Nora breathed deep, felt the weight of her gear settle, felt the vibrating metal beneath her boots. 20 seconds. The wind tore at her face, salt stung her eyes. 10 seconds. She touched her compass tattoo again, a reflex, a grounding point, a reminder of every moment she'd chosen to keep going when stopping would have been easier. 5. Holly leaned forward, voice nearly lost in the engine roar. "Don't freeze," he said. Nora didn't blink. "Don't fall," she replied. The ropes dropped. The world tilted. The drill began. And for the first time since boarding the Bataan, she felt something sharp and steady surge through her chest. Not anger, not fear. Resolve. Because Holly didn't know the truth. SEALs weren't just trained in water. Some were reborn in it. Why did the world always fall silent right before someone tried to break her? The flight deck of the USS Bataan stretched wide under the burn of early Gulf sunlight, metal steaming from the morning washdown. Helicopters whined in the distance, crew members jogged between staged gear, and the ocean wind carried the sharp scent of jet fuel and salt. But the noise faded when she stepped forward, not because anyone respected her, but because they didn't know where to place her. Lieutenant Commander Nora Calloway didn't slow her stride. If there was one thing she'd learned in 2 theaters of war, it was that hesitation gave doubt a place to grow. Still, she felt it. The looks, the whispers, the measuring. To most Marines on this deck, she wasn't a SEAL or an officer or a veteran of missions still sealed behind black bars and redactions. She was simply a woman walking through a space they'd mentally marked with invisible fences. She reached the rope station where today's joint fast rope drill would begin. Marines stretched, checked gloves, tightened harnesses. A couple stared too long at her tattoo, a simple compass on her wrist. They thought it was decoration. They didn't know each point marked a place she'd been broken and forced to rebuild. She felt movement behind her. Holly. She didn't need to look to recognize the cadence, sharp, clipped, confident in the way men became when surrounded by an audience. "You lost, ma'am," he called out, loud, clear, designed for effect. Conversations dimmed again. She lifted her chin slightly but didn't turn. "No, Lieutenant, just waiting for the brief." "Right," he said, "because this is SEAL business now." Another Marine snickered. Holly circled to face her, tall, squared shoulders, a jaw sculpted by years of barking orders. His expression carried a look she'd seen in various shades across FOBs, command posts, and dive lockers, doubt dressed as arrogance. "You sure you're up for this?" he asked, fast roping from 30 feet on a pitching deck with actual Marines. There it was, the setup. She watched him without blinking. "I'll manage." He stepped closer, lowering his voice not for privacy but for tension. "This is Coronado, sweetheart." Sweetheart. The word hit the air like a slap disguised as a compliment. Marines looked up from their gear. Some braced, some smirked, some simply waited. The theater was open. Holly wanted a performance. Nora didn't give him one. "I know where I am," she said calmly. Holly's jaw ticked, just barely. Her lack of reaction sharpened his frustration. He wanted something bigger, fear, anger, anything he could use to justify the conclusion he'd already drawn. He found another angle. "So what exactly is it?" he asked. "Navy PR, some integration experiment. You here to show us how we're supposed to do our jobs?" She held his gaze. Her heartbeat didn't change. "I'm here to observe, that's all." "You can observe from the safety boat," he shot back, "or from behind the glass." "I prefer the rope." Holly laughed, a dry, disbelieving sound. "Of course you do." He stepped forward again, too close, and she didn't move back. A flicker of irritation crossed his eyes. She wasn't playing the role he expected. Then it happened. A shove. Calculated, sharp, delivered with just enough force to send her foot sliding toward the deck's edge where the safety net curved over open sea. Gasps erupted, gloves froze mid-tightening, even the wind seemed to pause. Nora caught herself with one hand on the railing, smooth, controlled. Holly expected stumble, fear, embarrassment. What he got was stillness, the kind that came from surviving things much heavier than a petty push. She straightened slowly. "Careful," she said softly, but with an edge he wasn't ready for. "Wouldn't want you slipping." Holly's nostrils flared. "You don't belong here." She felt the old memories tug, brown water closing over her head, icy surf thrashing her sideways, instructors yelling from the beach as she kicked against currents meant to break people stronger than her. But she made it through. Twice she almost didn't. Twice she'd woken up on sand, coughing ocean out of her lungs while someone slapped her back yelling, "Breathe, breathe." And she did. Because stopping wasn't an option. Because drowning wasn't fear. It was choice. She flicked her eyes down at the compass on her wrist. Then she looked up at Holly and said, "I belong wherever I stand." Before he could respond, a voice blared from the catwalk above. "CALLAWAY," Captain Torr shouted. "Briefings in 2, move." She turned and walked away, boots echoing in the metal underdeck stairwell. Holly didn't follow. He didn't have to. His anger trailed behind her like static. In the briefing room, Marines clustered around screens showing the day's drill layout. Maps, deck diagrams, roping points, nothing she hadn't done 100 times. Holly led the session, trying not to look at her, trying not to show the frustration etched into his posture. He explained the insertion timeline, the ship clearing sequence, the fallback protocols. When he finished, he looked directly at her. You can observe from the boat, he repeated. No, she said. I'll rope with second squad. A murmur of surprise. Holly leaned back, forcing indifference. Are you current on fast rope certification? Very. Got your own kit. You're issuing one. Dust-dry sarcasm flickered across a few Marines' faces, quickly suppressed. Holly clenched his jaw. Fine, but if you fall. I won't. Her voice didn't rise, didn't need to. Ramirez, leaning against the wall with folded arms, watched the exchange with the quiet intensity of someone who'd seen 100 young officers burn out on ego. His eyes lingered on Nora. Not skeptical, not impressed, just aware. Awareness was rare, she appreciated it. 15 minutes later, she sat alone on a storage crate in a dim corner of the hangar deck, tightening her gloves. She exhaled slowly, letting her breath steady. This was supposed to be simple. An evaluation assignment. Observe, report, recommend. But Holly had changed that. He wasn't the enemy. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't broken. He was threatened. And threatened men built tests disguised as training. She rubbed her ribs unconsciously, the old fracture singing again, a memory of a wall collapsing in Sangin, a reminder that bodies remember what minds try to bury. Her hand trembled just once. She closed her eyes. A girl's voice echoed from years ago, small and soft. Was my daddy brave? Brooke's daughter, 7 years old. Missing teeth. Clutching a photo like it was a life raft. Nora had said yes. Because he had been. Because she'd held his hand as he took his last breath behind a mud brick wall, while gunfire shredded the air. She swallowed hard. That memory never softened. Not with time. Not with distance. Not with medals. Brooks didn't die so she could let another generation learn the wrong lessons. She stood. Time to rope. The helicopter thundered to life, blades roaring as Marines loaded in. She climbed aboard last, locking in beside Ramirez, who gave her one slow nod, approval, warning, and respect rolled into one. Holly stared at her from across the cabin. The look wasn't angry anymore. It was something more dangerous. He wanted to see her fall. Because if she fell, everything he believed stayed intact. The crew chief signaled. 10 seconds. The deck of the ship below tilted as the helo banked toward the training vessel. 5 seconds. Her heart slowed. Her breathing deepened. Her mind sharpened. The ropes dropped. Light flooded the cabin. Wind whipped her face. Holly gripped his rope tightly. Nora gripped hers loosely, like she'd done this 1,000 times underwater, in storms, in combat zones where descent meant life or death. The crew chief shouted, "G.O." And Nora stepped off into the Gulf wind without a single flicker of fear. Because what Holly didn't understand, what he couldn't understand, was that she wasn't battling him. She was battling the memory of water filling her lungs the first time she survived what should have drowned her. And surviving that made everything else small. Why did the ladder feel steeper tonight, even though she'd climbed hundreds like it in worse places? Nora braced a palm against the cold metal rung as the team ascended through the cargo ship's narrow interior. Smoke drifted low across the floor, not thick enough to choke, but dense enough to disorient. The simulated alarm still echoed overhead, too loud, too sudden, too perfectly timed to be coincidence. Holly pushed the pace again, boots striking metal fast enough to make a warning tremor in the ladder. He wasn't looking back, wasn't checking spacing, wasn't thinking about the 7 people relying on him for safe movement. He was thinking about being first, being right, being unchallengeable. But Nora felt the tension rising like heat. And Marines felt it too. Ramirez's voice whispered through the dim, "Careful, he's rushing." Not for her benefit. For everyone's. They reached the next deck and spilled into a maintenance corridor lit only by emergency glowsticks. Nora swept her light in quick arcs, assessing angles while listening to the static-filled radio transmissions coming from topside. Nothing matched the brief. Not the routes. Not the alarms. Not the smoke. Not the tension thickening in the spaces between breaths. Halle halted at the junction of two narrow corridors and lifted a clenched fist for quiet. The team stilled instantly. He keyed his radio. Safety Bravo element. Confirm scenario parameters. The reply came garbled. Verify standby alternate flooding. Static swallowed the rest. Halle lowered the radio slowly, confusion flickering in the tight line of his jaw. Not doubt, not yet, but something close enough to make him hesitate. That hesitation cost precious seconds. Nora exhaled. Her breath trembled not from fear but memory, water rising fast, shouts calling her name through surf, the realization that the only way out was the way no one wanted to take. She swept her light again and caught something on the wall. A schematic, faded, industrial, half-rusted to the metal, but readable. And wrong. The ship's internal layout didn't match the diagrams from the brief, but it did match this older version. A ship forgotten by time but not by whoever set up this scenario. Why would someone build a stress drill designed to confuse even the instructors? She answered her own question before she meant to. Because someone wanted her to fail. She stepped forward. "Sir, service ladder here leads 2 decks up. It'll take us to the forward weather deck." Halle turned. "That's not one of our approved routes. It's the only one that isn't marked damaged." He scanned the area again, jaw tightening. "We wait for safety." "We shouldn't," she said quietly. He stiffened. "That's not your call." "Maybe not." But letting people drown because of rules had never saved anyone. She angled her light up the ladder. "I can check it." Holly's voice sharpened. "You'll stand by." Her heartbeat slowed. Her breathing steadied. Her pulse flattened into the same rhythm it took on inside collapsing buildings and flooded corridors. She climbed. "Calloway," Halle snapped, "get back here." But the Marines behind him didn't move to stop her. None of them. Not because they chose her over him, they hadn't. Not yet. But because something in her movement reminded them of something they'd seen before. A certainty. A purpose. A refusal to leave them in a bad situation. Ramirez didn't call out either. Just watched her go with the quiet acceptance of a man who trusted experience more than rank. The ladder rattled under her boots as she climbed 2 decks up. She pushed through a hatch stiff with rust and emerged onto the weather deck, a dark stretch of metal slick with spray, illuminated only by moonlight breaking through cloud. Clear. Stable. Safe. She keyed her radio. "Forward weather deck secure. Route confirmed." A pause. Heavy. Thick with unspoken admission. Then Ramirez's voice, "Copy, moving." Boots thudded against metal below. Marines followed her marked waypoints, moving with urgent precision. Halle's footsteps came last, slower than before, deliberate, like he was swallowing something he didn't want to taste. When he appeared at the top of the ladder, he didn't speak, didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge the reality hanging between them. But his silence carried weight. Because he knew. He misjudged the situation. He misjudged her. He misjudged the line between testing someone and endangering everyone. The team assembled along the railing, waiting for extraction. Cold wind tore at their gear. The sea below churned, restless. Ramirez caught her eye and gave a small nod, something close to gratitude, something close to respect. Halle looked out at the water. His voice came low, barely audible under the wind. "You shouldn't have gone without clearance." Someone had to move, she replied. That someone wasn't you. She studied him, the tension in his shoulders, the way he gripped the railing, the quiet tremor of uncertainty peeking through his hardened exterior. You set up a scenario where no one could succeed, she said softly. You don't get to be angry when someone finds the exit. His jaw flexed, but he didn't respond. The safety boat's spotlight swept across the deck, washing the team in white light. Marines boarded first. Ramirez followed. Hale climbed in last, still silent. Nora stepped onto the boat and sat opposite him. The engine rumbled beneath her, vibrating through her boots as the boat cut across the waves toward the Bataan. Nobody spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everyone was thinking the same thing. If she hadn't gone up that ladder, they wouldn't be here right now. Hale stared at the floor of the boat, fingers tapping a rapid, restless rhythm against his leg. The rhythm of a man beginning to question the foundation he'd built his pride on. Nora didn't look at him. She looked at the water, dark, shifting, cold. Where she had almost drowned twice. Where she had found herself twice. Where she had learned that breaking didn't mean ending. It meant beginning. The boat surged forward under the night sky, carrying them back toward the ship, toward the confrontation waiting on the other side of the debrief, toward the truth Hale could no longer outrun. Because tonight wasn't about a drill gone wrong. It was about a leader realizing he picked the wrong person to underestimate. And the woman next to him, calm, steady, quiet, was no longer someone he could push, dismiss, or ignore. She wasn't there to impress him. She was there to change what came after him. And the first crack in his certainty had finally appeared. Why did the conference room feel colder than the cargo ship's steel corridors? The air conditioning hummed softly overhead, but the chill wasn't mechanical. It came from the tension stretched invisibly between the three people seated around the long table, Captain Torres at the head, Lieutenant Commander Nora Calloway on one side, First Lieutenant Marcus Hale on the other. Ramirez stood near the door, silent, arms crossed, the only steady anchor in a room vibrating with unspoken truths. Documents lay untouched on the table. Water bottles remained unopened. Torres hadn't even removed his cover. He looked tired, in that specific way commanding officers did when the line between accountability and damage control blurred. Hale stared straight ahead, jaw locked, posture stiff enough to creak. He didn't look at Nora, not directly, but every few seconds she saw his eyes shift, a quick glance, a flicker of resentment, confusion, disbelief. She knew that look. The look of a man confronting the possibility that he'd been wrong longer than he wanted to admit. Torres exhaled slowly, setting a tablet on the table. "Let's begin," he said. "No rank introductions. No small talk. Just the tone of someone who knew something had gone very wrong." Ramirez cleared his throat. Insertion was clean. Movement was clean. Stressors were within expected range until scenario parameters changed. Torres turned a sharp gaze toward Hale. "Lieutenant, why weren't the modifications coordinated?" Hale straightened. "Sir, my intent was to replicate battlefield friction, realistic stress, rapid adaptation under unclear conditions. Were safety channels informed? They were aware adjustments were planned." Torres' eyes narrowed. "Planned isn't the same as communicated." Hale's jaw tightened, but he held his ground. "With respect, sir, the situation never fell outside safety tolerances." Ramirez spoke quietly but firmly. "We were one blocked exit away from trouble." Silence. Torres rotated his gaze from Hale to Nora. "And you," he said, "chose to break protocol." Nora didn't flinch. "I chose to move when movement was the only safe option. Against explicit instructions." Her breath slowed, her heartbeat steadied. She met his gaze without lowering hers. With respect, sir, explicit instructions didn't match the tactical reality on the ground. The route I took was stable, clear, and the fastest way out. I verified it myself. Holly snapped, "You took command of my squad." "No," she said quietly. "I took responsibility when no one else could." The room froze. Holly's hands curled into fists on the table. "You undermine leadership, people die." She turned to him, not angry, not defensive, just controlled. "And when leaders refuse to adapt, people die faster." His face reddened. Torres cut in, "Enough." The captain leaned back, studying them both. "Lieutenant Commander Calloway," he said, "I've received preliminary details about your background." Holly stiffened, sensing the shift. Torres continued, "Your operational record is heavily redacted, entire sections classified above my clearance, and your deployment count is, well, unusual for someone your age." Nora didn't answer. Torres' voice softened, but his eyes remained sharp. "Why didn't you disclose your full background to Lieutenant Holly?" She held still for a breath. Then another. "Because the truth wasn't complicated." It was heavy. "I shouldn't have to," she said quietly. Holly blinked. He wasn't expecting that answer. She continued, voice steady. "If my presence here requires a resume to be respected, then the problem isn't my background. It's the environment." Torres inhaled deeply through his nose, the kind of breath that suggested he agreed but couldn't say so outright. Holly's voice came low, almost strained. "You let me believe you were." "What?" she asked, less. He swallowed, words caught in his throat. She leaned back, her tone calm but cutting. "Respect based on assumptions isn't respect. It's courtesy, and courtesy disappears the moment someone feels threatened." Holly broke eye contact. She saw it, the crack widening, the certainty he'd carried for years beginning to dissolve under the weight of reality. Torres picked up a pen, clicked it once and set it down. "Commander," he said, "did you feel targeted during training?" The room held its breath. Nora didn't answer quickly. She weighed the question, the impact, the truth. Finally, "I felt tested by someone who had already decided the outcome." Holly looked up sharply. She didn't look at him when she continued. "I've been in rooms where people doubted me quietly, whispered, questioned my place. That's normal, but today wasn't doubt, it was design." A muscle in Holly's cheek twitched. Torres turned to him, "Lieutenant." Holly opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "I pushed her," he admitted reluctantly. "Harder than I should have, harder than I would have pushed someone else." The confession hung between them. Torres didn't blink. "Why?" Holly stared at the surface of the table. "I thought she was unqualified." "And now?" Holly's throat bobbed. "I don't know what she is," he said quietly, "but she isn't what I thought." Nora felt something strange flicker inside her chest. Not satisfaction, not triumph, something closer to grief. Because it shouldn't take near failure for someone to see her clearly. Torres looked at her again. "Will you be documenting this in your assessment?" She paused, chose her words like stepping stones across deep water. "I'll document facts," she said. "Nothing more, nothing less." "And Lieutenant Holly?" She considered him, the stiffness in his shoulders, the quiet tremor in his fingers, the humiliation he was too proud to show. "He made assumptions," she said softly. "We all do. What matters is what we do after we're proven wrong." Holly looked up, their eyes met. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not apology, but the beginning of understanding. Torres closed his folder. "Then this debrief is complete." Chairs pushed back, boots shifted, Ramirez opened the door. But as Nora stood, Torres spoke again. "Commander Calloway," he said, "a word." Holly paused in the doorway, but Torres motioned him out. Ramirez followed him. Nora remained. Torres waited for the door to close. Then he leaned forward, voice low. "You should know something," he said. "I've had dozens of observers and liaisons come through my ships, but none with your file. I don't know what you've done, and maybe I never will, but I know this." He tapped the table once. "Hale's problem isn't you. It's the fact that seeing you excel forces him to confront parts of himself he's ignored for years." She didn't respond. He continued, softer now. "Some people break when challenged. Some adapt. You'll know which kind Marcus Hale is long before he does." She nodded once. Torres exhaled slowly. "And remember," he said quietly, "strength isn't always loud." She stood, "No, sir." "And dignity," he added almost to himself, "doesn't shout." She left the room without looking back. In the hallway outside, Hale stood alone, waiting, not for her, for something he didn't yet understand. She walked past him. He didn't speak. Neither did she. But as she moved down the corridor toward the dim stairwell, and the smell of JP5 drifting from the hangar deck, she felt it. A shift. A fracture. A beginning. Because sometimes the hardest battles weren't fought with rifles or ropes or breaching charges. Sometimes they were fought in silence, across tables, in rooms where truth weighed more than steel. And tonight she hadn't won anything. She'd simply stood her ground. Sometimes that was the victory. Why did the ship feel different the moment she stepped back onto the flight deck? Not quieter. Not louder. Just aware. Word travels fast on a warship, faster than machinery, faster than orders, faster even than truth. And sometime between the failed drill and sunset, something shifted in the way people looked at her. Not admiration. Not acceptance. Just a slow recalibration, like they'd all been handed a new lens and weren't sure how to use it yet. Nora walked the length of the catwalk alone, wind pushing against her shoulders, her boots clinking softly on steel. The sun hung low, bleeding orange into the waves, turning the ship's shadow into a long, dark scar across the water. She didn't come here for reflection. She came here because she needed to breathe. But the question followed her. What happens now? Not to her, she'd be fine, she always was. But to the man who had spent days trying to prove she didn't belong. Hale. She had seen that look in the debrief. The quiet unraveling. The kind that didn't break a person, but forced them to see the cracks they'd painted over. Some men doubled down. Some shut down. Some disappeared into their pride. But a rare few, painfully rare, rebuilt. Which kind was he? She didn't know yet. And she didn't trust hope enough to guess. Footsteps approached behind her, slow, hesitant, a stark contrast to the confident strut she'd come to associate with Marine officers. She didn't turn. "Ma'am," a voice said quietly. "Not Hale. Ramirez." He joined her at the railing, hands clasped behind his back. His profile was calm, steady, carved from years of real experience rather than theory. They stood without speaking. Finally he said, "You did the right thing today." She didn't answer. He continued, voice low enough not to carry in the wind. "I've seen leaders freeze under less pressure, seen good Marines get hurt because someone couldn't admit the plan wasn't working." His jaw tightened at some memory she couldn't see. "You didn't wait," he said. "You acted, others followed, that matters." She kept her gaze on the horizon. It wasn't about proving anything. "I know," Ramirez said. "That's what makes it different." Silence settled again, heavy but not uncomfortable. Then he added, "Hale isn't a bad officer." "I know," she said softly. "He's stubborn," Ramirez said. "Believes in what he believes in, sometimes too much, but he's not cruel and he's not malicious." A pause. "He just thinks he has more to lose than he actually does." Nora turned her head. "And you?" He sighed. I've served under every type of leader. The ones who shout, the ones who whisper, the ones who stand in front when things go wrong, and the ones who vanish when it matters. He looked at her, really looked. You're the kind who moves, he said, even when others don't. His words landed heavier than intended. Maybe because she knew exactly what he meant. Maybe because she didn't always see her actions as bravery, sometimes just necessity. She pushed off the railing lightly. Rest up, Gunny, tomorrow will be long. He nodded, understanding more than he said. She walked away, but Ramirez's voice carried one last thought across the deck. Holly will come around, eventually. She didn't respond. She wasn't sure she believed that. Her stateroom felt smaller tonight, the overhead light too harsh, the air too still. She dropped her gear beside the bed, unstrapped her gloves, flexed her fingers. They ached not from the drill, but from gripping too tightly. She reached into her pack and pulled out the waterproof case she never opened yet always carried. Tonight she placed it on her lap. Her fingers hovered over the latch. 1 beat. 2. 3. She opened it. The photo lay inside, edges worn, colors softening over time. Brooks and his daughter, sunglasses crooked, hair whipped by California wind, smiles too bright for a world that didn't keep its promises. Nora touched the surface gently, tracing their outlines. She remembered the smell of Afghan dust, the muffled thud of gunfire behind thick walls, the way she held Vega's hand as he screamed through the tourniquet, the way Brooks went still, too still, as she pressed gauze and blood soaked through it anyway. Her throat tightened. You'd hate all this, she whispered to the photo. Politics, ego, posturing. But Brooks had believed in people. Believed they could learn. Believed they could grow. Sometimes she envied him. She closed the case and set it aside. A knock sounded at her door. 1. Hesitant. Not assertive enough to be Ramirez. Not casual enough to be a junior Marine. She knew who it was before she opened it. Holly stood there, hands clasped behind him, posture rigid, eyes restless. Not angry, not defensive. Just human. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. This a bad time? He asked quietly. Yes, she said. But she stepped aside anyway. He entered slowly, like the room itself might accuse him. She closed the door behind them. Holly stood in the center, unsure where to put his hands, his voice, his pride. Finally, I need to say something. She waited. He swallowed. I was wrong. Simple words. Heavy words. Rare words. He kept going before he lost momentum. I created a test for you, he admitted. A trap, really. I didn't think you'd pass it. I didn't want you to. His voice cracked slightly, not weakness, just strain from truth bending a rigid spine. When you climbed that ladder, he said quietly, I knew exactly what it meant, and I still hesitated. He breathed in shakily, as if saying it out loud hurt. You shouldn't have had to save my Marines from my decision. Her voice was steady but soft, but I did. He nodded, slow, accepting. I don't expect you to forgive that, he said. I don't, she replied. He blinked, but she continued before he misread her tone. I don't forgive or condemn, she said. I assess, then I move on. Holly's shoulders loosened, not from relief but from understanding. She stepped closer, not confrontational, just honest. You're not a bad leader, she said, but you lead from a place of fear. His brow furrowed. Fear. Fear that you're not enough unless someone else is less. The words hit him harder than he expected. Something in his posture cracked. He looked at the floor. I can be better. You can, she said, but only if you want to. He nodded, a small, honest, vulnerable nod. I do. She studied him for a long moment. Then start tomorrow, she said. Start with them, not with me. Holly exhaled, a release of tension years in the making. She opened the door. He stepped out, paused, and said, "Thank you." She didn't respond. He left. The door clicked shut behind him, and the room fell quiet again. Nora sat on her bunk, elbows on her knees, hands clasped. The loneliness came then, not sadness, but the kind of quiet weight that follows truth spoken out loud. She breathed through it. Because tomorrow would bring trials of its own, not simulated, not designed, but real in the way human nature always is. And she would face them the same way she faced everything else. Calm, steady, silent. Because sometimes strength wasn't a raised voice or a hardened stance. Sometimes it was a woman standing alone in a small stateroom, steadying herself for the next day, not because she feared it, but because she cared enough to meet it with clarity. Why did goodbye always feel heavier on ships than anywhere else? Maybe it was the metal. Maybe it was the confinement. Maybe it was the way the ocean carried sound differently, softer, slower, like it refused to let moments end too quickly. Nora stood on the flight deck before sunrise, the horizon still a thin gray line waiting to be drawn. Her gear sat in a single ruck at her feet, straps neatly folded, placement precise enough to be ritual. She wasn't leaving because she wanted to. She was leaving because her work here was done. She exhaled long and slow, watching the vapor dissolve into the wind. The Gulf smelled the same as it had 2 weeks ago, salt, diesel, humidity, but she felt different, more grounded, more tired, more aware of the invisible weight she carried. A footstep softened behind her. "I thought you'd be gone already," Ramirez said. She smiled faintly, "Not until the next boat arrives." He nodded, stopping beside her. He didn't fidget, didn't shift his weight, just stood with the steady quiet he wore like armor. "This place will feel different without you," he said. "No," she replied. "It'll settle, ships always do." He looked at her for a long moment. "You did good here, ma'am, even if most won't ever understand how much." She didn't respond, didn't need to. Because Ramirez wasn't praising, he was acknowledging. And acknowledgement mattered. A faint clatter echoed from the ladder well. Holly emerged onto the deck in full uniform, looking sharper than she'd ever seen him, razor-straight cover, pressed blouse, boots polished like he'd spent the whole night on them. She almost smiled. Not at him. For him. He approached with a measured, almost hesitant stride. The Holly who arrived on this ship would have marched. The one who'd argued with her in the briefing room would have strutted. The one who shoved her at the rope station would have smirked. This version. This one walked with intent, not ego. "Commander," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "Lieutenant," she returned. He glanced at Ramirez briefly, then back to her. "I wanted to speak before you left." She waited. He took a breath, steady, bracing, like a diver about to submerge. "I've started restructuring the training pipeline," he said. "Clean communication flow, updated safety chain, clearer stress protocols." She nodded, not approval, not dismissal, just acknowledgement. "And," he added, looking at the deck for a moment before lifting his gaze again, "I told my Marines the truth." She tilted her head slightly. "Which version?" He huffed a quiet exhale, almost a laugh. "The version where I made mistakes," his eyes softened, "and the version where you didn't." That hit deeper than she expected. Holly squared his shoulders. "I don't expect a second chance, but I'm taking the first step." She considered him, not his rank, not his posture, but the effort beneath his words. The kind that cost pride, the kind that marked real change. "Good," she said softly, "then keep stepping." He nodded, a real nod, not a performative one. There were no apologies. No handshakes. No dramatic speeches. Just growth. Quiet. Honest. Earned. Tors appeared at the edge of the deck, calling out that transport was ready. Nora picked up her ruck, tightening the strap once before slinging it over her shoulder. Holly stepped aside as she passed. "Commander," he said in a low voice. She paused. He met her eyes. "You didn't have to teach me anything." "No," she agreed, "but someone once taught me." Then she left him standing there, sun rising behind him, sea wind brushing his uniform, the weight of his own evolution settling across his shoulders. The small transport boat rumbled softly as it carried her away from the Bataan. She stood near the bow, one hand gripping the rail, watching the ship grow smaller behind her. Hundreds of stories lived in that metal. Hundreds of futures, too. She had changed only a sliver of it, a handful of minds, a single trajectory, maybe a culture shift too small to measure yet. But change didn't need a parade. It only needed a beginning. Her compass tattoo caught the light, the 8 points etched into her skin, each one a place where she'd been pushed, tested, broken, or made whole again. The boat cut through the waves, leaving a white trail in its wake. And she let herself remember, not with pain, not with guilt, but with something steadier. Brooke's daughter, standing on a beach in Virginia, small hands gripping a photo of a man gone too soon. Was my daddy brave? Yes, he was. And so was she. Not in loud ways, not in theatrical ways, but in the ways that mattered, the ways made of silence, endurance, and hard-earned truth. The coastline grew clearer ahead, the Bataan faded behind her. And she felt something she rarely allowed herself. A quiet sense of purpose. Her next assignment waited, a billet teaching advanced tactics to the next generation, operators who would carry forward lessons she'd earned the hard way. Not lessons about being unbreakable. Lessons about what came after breaking. She tightened her grip on the rail, letting the wind whip her hair loose from its bun, letting the salt sting her eyes. Sometimes she wondered if the world would ever truly change. Sometimes she doubted. But then she remembered something her father taught her in the water when she was 9 years old. Survivors don't win because they're stronger. They win because they choose to keep moving long after strength is gone. She closed her eyes. Let the wind carry that truth forward. Let the sea keep the rest. Because dignity didn't need applause. Strength didn't need noise. Resilience didn't need a witness. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.